Hi, this is Bungalow Bill, and welcome back to From the Depths. Today, I'm going to be retrofitting the fighter at home and turning it into a more capable craft. So, I did go over briefly in the retrospective what I liked about it and what I didn't like about it. Here, the reason that I'm doing this is for my new playthrough, I'm currently building a carrier, and I wanted to entirely outfit it with particle fighters. I realized that the amount of volume it would take to feed the number of particle fighters I wanted was too high. It just took too many engines. So I'm going to be mixing in some number of these plus some number of particle fighters, which means that I need to make sure that these are capable enough to not be a liability. Because I'm going to be launching these off of a carrier, it also has sort of other impacts for how this vehicle needs to behave. The carrier is going to have laser weapons that are good at fly swatting, so I'm still going to want it to be a capable area superiority fighter, but it doesn't have to be able to kill every plane it fights, and it would be good if it actually had a little bit more game against a wider variety of crafts. This vehicle isn't necessarily bad, but it launches, it's a relatively small number of missiles, all things considered, compared to what it could. It doesn't do a saturation attack like the bomber, so it will have difficulties against some targets. But I'm going to hope to keep the speed, the maneuverability, and the firepower, and of course the small size, because I need to not push the entire carrier over the volume limit. And this is actually smaller than a flying squirrel. Let's spawn in a few enemy vehicles and take a look at some of the behavior again. First we'll show off good cases, then we'll show off bad cases, and then as I do the retrofit and have the new vehicle, we can take a look at these cases again and see if I get the same behavior. So I already have things a little slow. I'm going to slow them down even more. This is a case that we've seen before. On the approach, we come dangerously close to our own missiles. Here we did not actually destroy ourselves, which is better than happens sometimes. I did have a commenter point out, helpfully, that in the utility section, there is in fact a safety fuse, and this will stop your craft from blowing itself up. It doesn't stop the kinetic damage, which is actually heavy enough to be a problem sometimes. Especially because sometimes these missiles in particular will get stuck inside the craft and will hit the ammo boxes directly, blowing up the entire vehicle. Fortunately, it doesn't happen as often as the other friendly fire problems, but it still does happen. Also, on medium missiles, they're a very small percentage of an actual component. So if I put the safety fuse in, it's almost 94% free volume. So that's basically free. I could just do that on all the missiles, and this would actually reduce probably, it is a lot of my problems. So I'm just going to do that quickly, resave this, and let's show some of the other issues. So many of these enemy flying vehicles, and from the other factions as well, especially the Allied forces who have generally less capable vehicles because they're more fun-oriented, we can take down. There are some that we have issues with. Enemy vehicles that start getting faster, or have anti-missile systems, or both in some circumstances, are a little difficult. There go a lot of our missiles before we could even hit, and the rest of them did not hit. Of course, we did ourselves some kinetic damage there. Of course, that can happen. That was just pure luck. I think that the Wolf, I haven't taken it apart. I think it has missile avoidance routines. I think that's part of the reason it crashed into the ground, and also part of the reason we have so much trouble hitting it. It shoots down the missiles that are close to it and does a pretty good job of dodging or outrunning the rest. If we did not run that thing into the ground, it was going to take a long time. So let's look at some of our other problems. Now, we're not really going to beat dedicated anti-aircraft like the Black Mamba. This thing just has such a nasty high rate of fire, kinetic APS. The bombers can take them out. Without other support, I don't think it's that reasonable for the fighters. This may be the Gepard as well. The Gepard does combine some of our issues, but the actual problem here is our approach is way too straight. So the Gepard did not just annihilate us, but you can imagine, well, we just took a missile, but you can imagine it does not go well sometimes. And then we can loiter a bit too close overhead sometimes and fly away too straight as well. The Gepard also has moderately capable active protection systems, so we're having trouble getting our missiles through. In addition, half of our missiles are infrared, and something that I've been finding is that the infrared missiles, even against their best targets that are just fast jets, a ton of heat, they're getting decoyed too easily, and then against ground targets they often don't lock at all. So they're just not great. Even though it's going to give us issues with getting primary targets on enemy aircraft, I think I'm going to switch all of my missiles over to radar guidance and just rely on the carrier to get that air superiority if there are enemy land vehicles soaking up some of my fire. So let's destroy that enemy vehicle. Did not want to build on it. I wanted to snap to it so I can repair. And this is the structure that really gave me trouble. And I just wasn't prepared for it at all. So we're lucky that we haven't just been exploded already, that we even got this close. Most of the time this craft does not survive the approach, but if it does, it usually gets wrecked pretty quickly. Now, one of the liabilities was how close we were to our own missiles coming in, because this enemy vehicle actually shoots our missiles down. I think they're all gone already, but it was shooting our missiles down, which is why we were spared for a little bit. It's actually taking a while to kill us here. This is the longest I've seen, but it's a problem, unfortunately. Usually just a matter of time. It's also very good at zapping all of our missiles down. It would take a ridiculous number of these vehicles to get a missile through this. So, just not a cost-effective way to fight it. So, additional things I'm going to focus on because of this is more safely closing into enemy vehicles and better saturation fire of missiles. So I want to mix in some small missiles that are maneuverable, can do saturation fire, and might also have better luck hitting some of the faster or more agile enemy air vehicles. And then I'm going to make my own breadboard. It'll be a lot simpler, won't have any fancy dogfighting maneuvers, but I want it to be able to more safely approach the enemy vehicles and not have straight flight paths built into it, so that you're less likely to just get clowned by some random APS or missile shot that evaporates your vehicle, because that's expensive. Alright, I'm done with the breadboard. This is far, far simpler than the one that I took from Eigenfunction and was on the previous one. I never really dug that deep into what it did. It was just such a cloud of components and so complicated. This is actually much, much simpler. There's very little going on here. This is a circle at a distance breadboard. The way that it works is, if it's within a certain distance, it'll turn outwards to a certain angle. It actually, within 200 meters of the combat distance, it will linearly mix that angle to become perpendicular at this distance. So rather than sort of hitting the combat distance coming in and then running back out, then coming back in, it kind of smoothly blends it in. So that's the only nice thing here. There's also just a little bit of stuff setting minimum altitude. I forgot that there was actually a clamp component, so I didn't use it. I might delete some of these slightly overcomplicated stuff, use the clamp, and it'll let me set a maximum altitude with fewer components. There's no maximum altitude in here because of that. The other stuff going on here is that this kind of corkscrews, it's not a very fancy way of corkscrewing. It's just a cheap way to do it slapped on top of everything. I've been considering fancier ways to do it, or something that might be a little bit more exact, because this doesn't always corkscrew very cleanly. And so it has roll built in as well. The roll and the corkscrewing are not coupled. So in theory, the bottom of the craft is supposed to be on the outside. And They sometimes are, just the controls are coupled, but there's nothing actually enforcing that to happen. Let me make sure this is actually correct. Yeah, so there's a little bit of fancy stuff going on here, but it's not actually connected to anything. I sort of had to give up because, unfortunately, trying to use the PID to set roll has issues when the craft turns upside down, so I can't get it to smoothly barrel roll. It'll keep trying to flip back over to the other side. So instead, it just tries to roll 0.2 all the time. Similarly, this thing just goes full burn all the time. I could try to set something a lot fancier to try to keep it as close as possible to a certain orientation so that it's actually lined up with the other corkscrewing. Haven't done that yet. Maybe a future improvement, but first I've got to do more testing about this, rebuild the craft, see if I'm happy with everything before I sink a lot of time into that. So the other thing going on here for the corkscrew is all that this is doing is basically adding an angular offset to the yaw and pitch commands. And then the yaw and pitch commands have some roll mixing in here. So based on the roll angle of the craft, it'll mix the yaw and pitch commands together so that this thing can actually operate when it's upside down. The rest of it's just thrust vectoring. And otherwise, this craft is exactly the same as we saw it. I can actually get rid of these munition detectors. They're not actually used anymore, and I will for the final version. So, reminder, we're still on a slow down game speed. So, this isn't perfect, but we're much less likely to blow up on the way in. Now, when we're actually in the circling portion of this, it's still not good enough. We're still going to get exploded. It's not as bad in many ways, but it's a matter of time. Eventually, we're going to get lased down. And it's really hard unless we just want to start doing loop-de-loops, which, you know, may be a thing I should consider, just like a craft that pulls loop-de-loops at a certain point rather than orbiting around. Would be something to think about. I would have to design the breadboard differently, so probably be a full rewrite, but maybe a future project. So, sort of what I mean by that as well. I have a very specific thing in mind when I say loop-de-loops. It's not necessarily actually loop-de-loops. It's if I spawn the enemy vehicle and look from here, it's to actually just make it so that... Oh, didn't mean to hide ourselves. So that we're always doing a corkscrew from the enemy's perspective. We did not do a very good corkscrew there, but... So it wouldn't always be loop-de-loops, it'd either be barrel rolls or loop-de-loops, depending on how close we are. Surprisingly, some missiles actually got through there. But, so this is a little bit of an improvement. Now...
Listening.
It's not going to dogfight as well. That's the one big consideration here. And I'm just going to accept that, because the dogfighting just isn't important with the large scales of battles that I've been seeing in this campaign. So I have decorations here somewhere. That's because these rail launchers and gantries, they actually serve as armor. There's nothing under here. This isn't something I'm going to change either. So there's actually just more missiles under the missiles. But I at least have to temporarily get rid of this stuff, because otherwise I'm just not going to be able to see what I'm doing. Something that annoys me a little bit, but not enough that I actually fixed it, is you can see, I think that's the launchers. Yeah, you can see the launchers through the decos, because the launchers are just a little bit bigger than a 1 meter cube. Just a little annoying. So, okay. What am I actually thinking? Well, first of all, let me put mirror mode on, even though this does not actually have mirror symmetry. So I'm going to get rid of the AI. I'm definitely going to move it. I'm going to get rid of the ammo and fuel storage. It's definitely going to get moved as well. And for the missile systems, so if I was to put small missiles the length of this vehicle, they would be way too long, and I would not have nearly enough of them. Earlier I said I wasn't going to do vertically aligned small missiles because they don't fit. They will fit. So the thing is, they don't fit well. The small launcher is going to be butted straight up into this applique armor. That's the only thing going to be protecting it. And then I'll be able to get just enough height going in here, so I'll have 3 meters. I could also set it in here. I think I'm going to set it in right here, so I'll keep the applique on top and get rid of the applique on the bottom. And this will get me 3 meters of height for 12 segment small missiles. I think that's what I want to go for without getting rid of these. Something that I don't want to get rid of that I kind of like is how the front of this looks. I like the cutout a lot. I may lose it, we'll have to see. So what I'm definitely going to get rid of I've been having these stutters during building since the last update. I think something went a little bit wrong. That's not uncommon. Things go wrong a lot. So I cleaned the control surfaces off as well. Since I'm using my own breadboard, I don't need them anymore. I added the wiggling in myself. I'm probably going to make these missiles a little bit bigger as well. They currently have 3 warheads, and they're quite fast. They're probably going to get slowed down a little bit. The turn rate's probably going to be a little bit worse, but they're going to hit a lot harder, and that's the sacrifice that I'm going to make. Clean this out as well. Okay, what does my space look like? Can get rid of that. Need that. So, give or take, this is how much room I have to work with. It's not a whole lot. So all of this area is going to be occupied by missiles. That's going to leave me with space up here, space down here, and space over here. So I'm going to start Tetrising, and I'll be back in a moment. Alright, a moment has passed, and I've re-Tetrised things a little bit. So I put these missiles in exactly where I said I was going to. I did kind of like the look of the applique, so I do miss it. I do wish that I still had the applique here. I don't think there's much I could do about that without having the small launchers exposed here. I don't want to deco the applique on top of it, and I don't want to put the applique here, so I'm just going to live with it. These missiles are a little bit bigger. They're longer. They're considerably slower. They actually have a better turn rate, but they have no... to get a decently long range, because I want them to be a little bit better against ground targets, a little bit more cruise missile style. They don't have a turning thruster anymore. The other thing about them is I kept the safety fuse, and I found they're bopping my craft more than I would have liked, but due to the extended range that I have, I made them drop as a bomb. This gives my craft a better chance of getting clear of them. Too many times, immediately when they fired, they would just bonk my craft and either take a section out here or take a chunk out of the missiles, especially these top ones, because right under these top ones is actually, under all these decos, is the small missile system. The reason the small missile system is here is because small missiles are really wasteful in terms of how many connectors you need. And I have no vertical room in this craft for connectors, so I had to build them horizontally in under these missiles. So these are all connectors. There's a little bit of fuel, and then there's the actual important things. There's the all-in-one local weapon controller. My previous one actually part of the reason it had two mainframes was it had no wireless receivers and that sort of thing. This one just needed them, and it saved a little bit of space, so I did it that way. And this doesn't actually do a sufficient saturation fire, so I'm gonna have to bump this up a little bit. I'll have a few more tweaks before we actually go through to test it. The other slight deficiency is these missiles and these missiles run off of the same system, which means that part of the hail of small missiles is just me dumping all three of these. It's not great, and these run off of their own system, but it's okay. Then down on the bottom, I do need more ammo storage. This got a little bit more expensive than my previous craft, about 7,000 more, but it has 50% more firepower. It's actually a lot more damaging. In some ways, it's a lot more efficient. For the amount of fuel that I'm burning, I'm throwing a lot more missiles, but it does mean that this is much more cramped with ammo. The chances of this thing exploding when it gets hit is even higher than the previous one. Mostly the ammo is more localized, so we're generally good. Oh, I have a single block here. Would probably be better if I merged these into a 3 and a 2. I don't think I can shrink this 1 meter in length. No, I don't think I can shrink it 1 meter in length to get rid of that small block, so I might just have to turn it into a 3 and a 2. Just a few little awkward 1 blocks sitting around. These are the most precarious, but it really doesn't matter which ammo storage we're hitting. We're blowing up if any of the ammo storages get hit. And then the AI is hiding in here. There's just one of them. Otherwise, it's exactly the same as the previous one, minus the fact that it has a wireless transmitter and the previous one didn't. And it has the same breadboard we saw before. The approach angle, I messed up a little bit, and I decided to just roll with it rather than fixing it. This is the opposite of the approach angle in the AIs. 90 puts you straight in, and 0 makes you never approach at all. So anyway, I'm gonna fix the timing on how we shoot these small missiles, and then I'm gonna start some testing. So I've given her a name, the errata, and I just tweaked the small missiles so that they fire a little bit less often. I also didn't talk about the front. So in the previous version, I had aerodynamic hatched gantries pointing at the front, and these are my drag reducers here and here. Without these, I had to add on slopes. This added on about 3 meters, so I don't have exactly the same look. To me, it looks more insect-like and more like a mandible than it did before, whereas before it looked more spaceshipy, but I'm just going to have to live with it. I could also have it be squared off. I tried both. I liked this a little bit better than the perfectly squared off front, but I can always go back and forth. I don't really like the orientation that I wound up in, but let's spawn this enemy. I'm going to look from their perspective and see what it looks like. Depending on the orientation that we're on roll-wise, our approaches do look different, so it wouldn't be a bad idea for me to fix that problem. So I'm too far away to see it. We sort of throw this halo of small missiles. They are safety fused, and they can hit us, so we try not to hit ourselves with them. It's not the end of the world, though. We don't take that much kinetic damage from hitting a small missile. It is the end of the world. No, not the end of the world, but it is a problem if we hit a medium missile. I can live with hitting the small ones sometimes. I'd have to safety fuse them. I can't live with hitting them if they explode. It's still too much damage, and we sometimes do just take ourselves out. So the big advantage now is with this hail of missiles, the enemy just can't do anything about it. And we were very lucky to kill them that quickly, but we will get them eventually. So being able to saturate these is really important. The reason it's so important is that I don't remember if the name showed up on screen, but I was only calling it the heat prototype for the Lua missile build that I did. I really want to be able to use that, which means that I need saturation missile attacks like this so that those heat missiles can get in. That thing can easily one-shot these vehicles. So if I have a few of these coming off of a carrier, and then one or two of those top-down Lua missile launchers in the background, those should be able to snipe all of these platforms very, very quickly. And let's take a look at... I'm sort of doing this in the reverse order from before. So let's look at Japard next. I don't know exactly what speed I'm on. I think it's roughly half. It's way, way easier to see what's happening, though. The full speeds are just too fast when you're dealing with planes like this. So I'm a big fan of this. We do have a very different missile orientation going in. Did we hit ourselves? No, I think we're good. Compared if we're rolling with our missiles on the outside or the inside, and it's totally random, and we usually wind up exactly in one or the other. So we're still going to take some enemy fire. Fortunately, the Japard has almost no APS firepower on this thing, and it already fell off. But the big difference now is due to our saturation missile attacks, we're actually getting missiles through. Sometimes I think we even get the medium missiles through, although that's a bit rare. The interceptors do prefer them. They're also not quite as agile. But yeah, we're even getting some of the medium missiles through. You know, we're not just tearing it apart or anything, but this is reasonable damage. This is a craft that I can use to engage a larger variety of enemies. I don't just have to lock it to one region fighting one type of enemy. We haven't blown ourselves up yet in any of the tests, which is pretty good. We haven't even hit ourselves yet, I think. We almost never hit ourselves with the medium missiles, which I think are also safety fused, but they hit us so rarely that there's almost no concern over it at all. And the small missiles do so little damage to us that with a safety fuse on them, it's not a big concern. The one thing about these small missiles, though, is safety fusing them is more expensive. The safety fuse is only 50% free space on them, whereas for medium, it's way, way more free. I suspect that it's supposed to be like roughly the same volume-wise if you do the conversion between, you know, how much volume is actually in the small missiles compared to the medium, or some weird calculation like that. So, I'm not going to sit through this whole thing. Oh wow, that was a slow missile. That must have been like 10% health. So, let's see. Next would be a plane, and it would be the Wolf. We're still not good against the Wolf, but this doesn't have to be as good against planes, I think. So the first thing is to not explode on the way in. This actually does happen to the fighter at home sometimes. If it just doesn't see the necessary enemy attacks, it will just run into either a missile, APS shells, and just blow up. The Wolf doesn't have nasty shells, but it does have shells. It's much, much harder to hit the fighter at home with APS. Not the fighter at home. It's much harder to hit the errata with APS compared to the fighter at home. Now, we are actually getting missiles through. We're not getting a lot of missiles through, but we are getting missiles through. But the Wolf actually does have a lot of interceptors, so it is difficult. We keep chipping away just a little bit of damage at a time, and we will get her eventually. At least we usually get her eventually. Oh, yeah, lost a few more components. Haven't gotten a good hit yet. Usually we get one eventually. One of our issues is we don't really try to get behind the enemy or point at them or get into an advantageous location to actually launch our missiles. The more chaotic a battle is, the more vehicles we have, the less important this is, because the chances that your enemy is actually trying to outmaneuver you is much, much lower. Now, with some of the new breadboard stuff, you can actually share variables, which means you could do some sort of formation flying. You could really try to do very, like, historically interesting things like the Thatch Weave or something. I don't think I'm ever going to put that type of time in. But another thing that I didn't do yet that I may do is sacrifice a few of these small missiles, I don't know how many, maybe one or two groups, and make them anti-missiles. I think it would help a lot. I am planning to have the carrier be, I am going to put lambs on it. It's going to be very resilient to missiles. Unfortunately, we haven't taken a jet out yet. That's sort of the dream, is that one of these hits from behind is either going to take out some anti-missiles or it's going to take out a jet. All that I really saw there was some hologram projectors and some alloy plates, which isn't really what we want to be taking out. And additionally, again, if this is a larger fight, more of a scramble, this looks better in comparison. This is sort of the worst case, where this thing looks not as great compared to the existing one than if it was very chaotic and maneuvering just didn't matter. So anyway, that's going to take a while, but it is at least better, even though it's not something that is super important. So the last one is the Coyote, which is the one that we take out the most easily with a fighter at home, along with, like, I'd say it's the enemy that's very capable, or at least somewhat capable, and is the easiest to take out with a fighter at home. There's some other enemies that are easier to take out but are less capable. The things here that are going to be worse for us is, one, the Coyote doesn't have EMP protection, the Wolf has a lot of EMP protection, and we're not using EMP missiles anymore. I was finding that a few of the enemies had too much EMP protection, and it was giving me just a little bit too much trouble. Something that I've been able to figure out is why missiles cut corners as badly as they do. They shouldn't be falling back past the enemy vehicle. I don't know if they can't turn enough. Some of them have turning thrusters as well, and are allowed a lot of fuel use on them. Or at least I've tried that and still have the same issue. So, our time to kill on the Coyote is way slower because we don't just kill her with one missile, we actually have to get through the armor. But we still get through eventually. She's almost despawning now. Oh, she's AI dead. So, unlike just hitting her with, one or two missiles, we have to actually hit her with a lot. I think it's an acceptable trade-off that we're now capable of fighting tanks. I have actually chosen a name for it, I just haven't saved it with a name yet. I've decided to call it the Slaughterfish. It looks a little bit like a fish. I was going to call it the Banana Fish, but didn't think anyone would get that one, so we're calling it the Slaughterfish. So let's see if this works or not. The idea is the fighter at home saturates missile defenses, and the Slaughterfish can actually take a fair bit of anti-aircraft fire. It'll get brought down eventually, but having this happen greatly improves our survivability. I think even in a larger scale battle, as long as we have enough of these firing missiles, we can keep this happening and we'll be fine. So the ideal is, I think I see... Oh, there's one. So, yeah, the ideal is that we can keep this busy and paralyzed and then not just bonk the ground. It is possible, though, that we will just straight up miss because we do have some inaccuracy from our instability. So there is spall lining, which helps for Hesh, but unfortunately large missile heat just punches all the way through. So unfortunately we missed with our first two missiles, but the third got there and punched through. So that's what my plan's going to be for the campaign moving forward. We'll see if it works out for me on tanks as well. I think it will sometimes. The Lua missile launcher just needs to be at least versatile enough that it doesn't feel like a waste of time to have it the rest of the time that I'm not bombarding static fortifications with it. But I want it to be good enough at blowing up slower tanks and static fortifications that I don't have these long, drawn-out fights that cost a lot of resources anymore. So, before starting the campaign, I still have to actually finish the carrier. It's mostly done, but it has to be finished. I have the particle fighter that I've built for it that needs to be decorated before I add it to the carrier, and then show off the process for that. And the hover tank needs to be hover tanked. Right now it's a land tank, and it needs to be brought up into the air. So that should all be done relatively soon, and then I'll finally be able to restart the campaign and see how it turns out for me. So anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you in the future.